I am Max Keiser, and this is the Keiser Report. Yeah, Europe is blowing up in all kinds of protestations and even violence. Stacy Herbert, talk to me. What are the hot spots? What's going on?
Max, the better question is what isn't a hot spot, okay? I want to talk a little bit first about Ireland because, you know, they have this new austerity budget, which we're seeing huge tax increases on everything from income taxes to business taxes to aviation taxes to energy taxes. At the same time, they're also making huge cuts in spending, so from education, health, and social services, all because they refuse to just let the banks fail, right? Yeah. Unlike Iceland, which is now growing, unemployment has actually decreased in Iceland in the past year. Ireland refuses to let go of those bad debts of the bad bankers. So I want to turn to this little video of an Irishman in Chicago. An Irishman speaks his mind.
What's the story here?
Do you really want to know?
I'd love to know.
Well, I'll tell you, it's like what has happened all over the Western world for the last 20 and 30 years. Greed, and more greed and cheap money. And in Ireland, it's a tragedy what happened to the tiger. We have, I'd say, 4 causes. We had a stupid government. We had a regulator that was asleep at the wheel. We had very deceitful and conniving and corrupt developers. And of course, above all, bankers.
I wonder what bleep means in Gaelic.
Shillelagh stick?
There's another person in America who's also Irish, who maybe these two should get together, and this guy speaking his mind could speak his mind to this other banker. Drum defaulted on second credit card company. So this is former Anglo-Irish Bank chief executive David Drum, who the Gardaí wished to question over major irregularities at Anglo-Irish Bank. According to the article, he fled Ireland 2 years ago as a series of scandals surrounding the bank began to emerge. He has so far refused to return to Ireland to cooperate with the authorities. He's hiding out in Boston, Massachusetts, United States of America, which is like sending everybody in the world after Julian Assange for much lesser crimes.
Well, America is like a petting zoo for criminals. The criminals can walk free, and you can like walk up to them and say, "Oh, hi, Anthony Mazzillo," or "Hey, David Drum. Boy, I'm shaking hands. Look, have my picture taken with a real live hardcore financial terrorist." You go back to your home, you know, and you share the photos with the kids and grandma. It's like a financial terrorist meets Disneyland.
So he fled to Massachusetts. He bought a $4 million home in Cape Cod and a $2 million home in Wellesley, just in the suburbs of Boston. Now, he then took out a bunch of credit cards and within 10 weeks declared bankruptcy of racking up huge debts on these credit cards. So now these Capital One Bank filed papers with a U.S. court stating Drum failed to pay a $14,688 bill on a credit card he received 9 weeks before filing for bankruptcy.
Well, this is the very definition of moral hazard. If you're not going to prosecute, it's a fancy way in banking to say if you don't prosecute the people stealing money, they're going to continue to steal money. Of course, in the ghetto, they'd call it larceny, and you put your butt in jail, and you wouldn't see the light of day for decades. But if you're a banker, it's moral hazard. And we're not strict on moral hazard. And this is what happens. A guy like David Drum, who's an inveterate larcenistic,
Well, fraud. This is outright fraud. He's taken out a credit card. The records filed by the bank provide further evidence that Drum sought out lines of easy credit at a time when he should have known he might not be able to pay the money back. So that's intent to defraud. His intent was to defraud the Irish people.
That's right, and he's destroying that economy. He's destroying the Irish economy. Now the virus of David Drum is loose in America.
It's not a present tense, it's past tense. He destroyed the Irish economy. There is no Irish economy. Yeah. He's not destroying it, he destroyed it.
Yeah, and like Godzilla, you know, he pops up in a new area and he's destroying the new economy. He's a virus, right? David Drum is a financial virus terrorist that's just, now he's loose in America and he's destroying that country. And there's no warrant out for his arrest. So does America think that they're going to develop an immunity to financial terrorism? Is that the idea? Like they need to be inoculated against this kind of thing, or arrest him, put him in jail, or just make it public knowledge that fraud and larceny is okay and let people bail themselves out by just going to the banks and taking all the money they need to make themselves whole and all the mortgages that were fraudulently sold to them to begin with, and just say, well, I'm doing this because there is no rule of law and the government told me to take all the money. I'm using the David Drum method of recouping my losses. I'm just stealing it. They just make stealing legal. Stop the charade. Stop the double standard.
Recall, so he bankrupted Ireland with tens of millions of dodgy loans to friends to develop dodgy property deals. Then he goes to America and he buys these millions of dollars homes. Then he declares bankruptcy shortly after taking out many credit cards from American banks. There were more than just his Capital One bank credit card. He has all these other credit cards. So he's defrauding the US taxpayer already. He declared bankruptcy owing 10.26 million euros, most of it which is owed to Anglo-Irish Bank. And now, what is he doing in Massachusetts? He runs a financial services company.
Only in America can you be a predatory financial terrorist and open up. Hey, where's his buddy? You know, the one I like is this guy, Sean Fitzpatrick, because he's got more of an Irish name. You know, David Drum sounds like an American schmata, scum, you know, typical. But Sean Fitzpatrick, that sounds like an Irish guy. Now, where's Sean hiding? He must be hiding somewhere, because I don't think the people are going to tolerate him, you know, much longer.
Well, the other thing that David Drum and his likes have also not only bankrupted Ireland, now he's in the process maybe of bankrupting the residents of Massachusetts, who knows, but he also is responsible for tearing apart the European Union, the fabric of the European Union, because it is, of course, the debts of places like Ireland, which is now causing a huge amount of friction on whether or not the euro can stay together. But a similar thing is happening in the US. Headline reads, CBO has started weighing the benefits of bankruptcy or default for local governments. So this is the Congressional Budget Office, and they're looking at the debt situation that is emerging in states and municipalities across America. Because, you know, like in the European system, they can't print their own dollars. Only the national government and the central bank can. The states can't, which is why you see these crises in Illinois or California, the constant emergency budget situation in California. But the CBO is now recommending a possible advantage of bankruptcy.
Well, this is interesting because it sets up a conflict between the states and the federal government. And this goes part and parcel with the history of the United States. This has always been a tension going back to the founding of the country between states' rights and the federal government rights. And it's becoming an issue again. And the states, if they start to default on these loans, they're going to set themselves up with a direct confrontation with the federal government. And this is why some are predicting another civil war in the United States.
One of the biggest, advantages, they say, of the bankruptcy process is that it will, quote, allow a municipal government to reduce its labor cost by facilitating the consent of employee unions to changes in labor contracts. So basically, by going bankrupt, they force all these unions to, forget it. They lose their pensions and their rights.
Yeah, like I said, a civil war. In other words, they want to put them back on the plantation and have them pick cotton for pennies on the dollar, pennies a dollar, and shop at the company store Walmart. That's what they want. That's what they're going to fight over. And it's all back to the antebellum South. Mammy, yeah, down there in Southern America.
Well, part of the reason why states and municipalities are going bankrupt is that, there are many unemployed people now in America. And because they're unemployed, they're collecting unemployment benefits and needing more social welfare services, which the states provide. And also the house prices are coming down, so property taxes are coming down, so states are going bankrupt. Now, this doesn't bode well, the next headline, home values to drop by 1.7 trillion this year.
Well, let's be clear about something. They're not going to drop another $1.7 trillion. They're just recognizing the fact that they've dropped by another $1.7 trillion. In other words, going back to 2007, when the global financial crisis, poo, hit the global financial fan, house prices in America dropped by 80 to 90%. But because they don't have accurate mark-to-market accounting and because it's all hidden through the derivatives market, this was not visible. They thought that, by simply flooding the market with more cash, we will stimulate things enough to get over this blip in reality and go back to fantasy land of flipping houses. But unfortunately, all that money went to commodity speculation, never made it into the housing market. So now 12, 24, 36 months later, they have to realize, you know what, it did fall 80, 90%, and America is in the worst depression since the Great Depression. This is the greatest depression.
So the loss since the June 2006 home price peak, according to Zillow.com, is $9 trillion now.
That's right. That's $9 trillion notionally, but if you add the derivatives tied to it, it's another 20 trillion. So we're talking 30 trillion in losses. And they're going to recognize 9 trillion of that on their books. They'll increase the debt ceiling from 14 to 20 or 25 trillion. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac another 5 trillion. The Bank of America scandal another 6 trillion. Plus the unfunded pension liability and Medicaid, that's another 50 trillion. So America's got about $180 trillion in debt. On top of an economy that supports about 7 cheeseburgers and a side order of fries.
And also, to put into the real world what this drop in home values means, Zillow says the percentage of homeowners with mortgages with so-called negative equity reached 23.2% in the third quarter, up from 21.8% at the end of 2009. So the situation towards the end of this year is getting worse for the American consumer, citizen, normal person, the bottom 99.9%. The likes of David Drum on the run with stolen millions from Ireland. Things are getting better for the likes of him.
I'll tell you something, a bull market going forward in snorkels.
Snorkels?
For all those homeowners. Where's my equity? Where's my equity? Ain't no equity coming back to you, homeowners. It's to the plantation for you. Jump down, turn around, pick a bale of cotton. Jump down, turn around, pick a bale of two. We've totally destroyed our country. Now we're looking for you too. All right, Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
When I come back, I'm going to Washington, D.C., the nest of vipers over there, and talk to Ed Harrison about all the stuff going on. So don't go away. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to Washington, D.C. Some call it the Devil's Den, but that should not reflect negatively on my guest, Ed Harrison. Ed is a former diplomat, businessman, entrepreneur who now blogs at the highly influential site creditwritedowns.com. It's like a crystal ball. He can tell you what's going to happen in the credit market in the future. Why? He used to be a high-yield bond salesman. He knows what's going down. Ed, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Great to be here, Max.
All right, now, leading up to this interview, you had mentioned that you just wrote something about GATA, about Lars Scholl in Germany. Tell me the details. This is hot breaking news. What's going on?
Well, there's this guy, Hellmeyer, who Lars had interviewed, and he was talking about GATA and the fact that a lot of people really think that there's some problems with the physical supply of gold, that basically, the gold has already been pawned off into the market, and that there's not a good accounting for that. And obviously, if this sort of thing got out into the public, people would become very upset, and then the price of gold would skyrocket as a result of that.
Okay, we're talking about the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, and we're talking about presumably Germany's gold, which is 66% held outside of Germany, and also the gold in Fort Knox. Are there other areas in the gold market that are claiming to be able to sell gold? I know Jim Rickards over there at Omnis recently made the point that one of his friends in the hedge fund community tried to take delivery of a ton of gold from a Swiss bank, and they were unable to do so. So are you seeing real gold shortages in the precious metals market? Is that what you're saying, Ed?
I don't play in the precious metals market on a regular basis, so I can't really say. But I would say that, you have to be really concerned about the ETFs, that especially as the gold price goes higher, how do you really know that they actually have the physical gold backing the paper gold? To me, it'll become very problematic going forward that you have all these ETFs that claim to own gold, when there's no proper accounting for whether they actually have the gold to begin with. And the same problem, that you see with the German central bank is also apparent with the ETFs.
Right. So ETF, exchange traded fund, really popular. The gold exchange traded fund has more than 1,000 tons, more than many countries out there. But what you're saying, and this would also go for the SLV, the other big exchange traded fund that applies to silver, the banks that support these two exchange products, the banks in this case being JP Morgan and HSBC, their balance sheets are in question. So if they go bankrupt, and technically, if you used mark-to-market accounting, both of those banks are technically insolvent. They're just kept afloat by this Ponzi scum game originating in your town over there in Washington, D.C., Ed Harrison. And without that largesse from the central banks, these banks would already be pushing up daisies because not only are they charlatans, but they're bad accountants.
JP Morgan, Chase, and HSBC are probably the best of the breed with regard to the global banks. The companies that you really have to worry about in terms of the global banks are companies like RBS and the Bank of America, which are large, but also have a lot more in terms of toxic assets on their balance sheet.
Okay, you brought up Bank of America. This is the bank most often mentioned in terms of the WikiLeaks and Julian Assange's big data dump coming as pertaining to one of the big banks. The name most often mentioned is Bank of America. Is that what you're hearing, Ed Harrison?
Yeah, that Bank of America, the documents are going to be about them. Obviously, it's going to be about, foreclosure, about mortgages, etc. And Bank of America, they took over Countrywide Financial, which is commonly seen to be one of the epicenters of the alleged fraud that was going on during the housing bubble. So, any documents they're going to have are going to be very juicy. It'll get to the bottom of whether or not really there was actually fraud going on at Bank of America.
Okay, so Bank of America took over Countrywide Credit, and we also talked with another analyst on the show recently who estimated that the potential balance sheet hit to Bank of America, if you were to extrapolate the damage of tens of thousands of faulty mortgages that they packaged and missold, it comes out to something like $6 trillion. That would be even bigger than the entire hit that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac has posed to the taxpayer when the U.S. government had put those liabilities onto the balance sheet of the U.S. taxpayer. $6 trillion potentially associated with tens of thousands of fraudulently induced, packaged, and sold mortgages. Does this sound like a feasible number to you, Ed Harrison?
I think that that number seems very high. What I would say is that basically, if you think that almost all of these mortgages that Countrywide and Bank of America packaged up and sold on to investors have problems with them, then you have a systemic issue. And then the question is how do you deal with that systemic issue? My belief is that what's really going to happen is that we're going to get some sort of fix, some legislative fix, in order to prevent these activities from becoming systemic. Because look, we're in Washington D.C. It's 2010. People are going to start campaigning for re-election in 2012. No one wants to see any sort of systemic issues coming to play. So they'll do whatever is necessary to keep these fraudulent activities from bringing down large institutions.
Okay, would that include retroactively, a law that would apply retroactively, for example, to allow the banks who violated the interstate notary law to suddenly say retroactively that law doesn't apply to them and that these mortgages are good to go?
Well, if the issue becomes great enough and it's systemic enough,
you're saying pass laws to bail out the crooks, and you're saying systemic risk is the wedge, is the gun pointed at at the head of Congress that if they don't pass new laws, the system blows up and everyone dies from bankruptcy. Now, we saw this movie in 2008 when Hank Paulson went to Congress and said, give us $750 billion or we're going to kill you. We're going to declare martial law, according to some accounts. And they've been trying this again. They tried to pass a reform bill under Obama, and they crashed the market. Remember the flash crash in May? That was all about forcing and coercively using the markets to pass or to not pass a reform bill. So now you're saying, once again, you've got the bankers in a corner. You found that they broke the law. They've committed a crime, fraud, embezzlement, larceny, and your response is to change the law. Is that what I'm hearing, Ed Harrison?
Exactly. Just like with regard to mark-to-market. If you recall, in 2009, early 2009, all of these companies, these big banks, were basically insolvent on a mark-to-market basis. So what happened? A great amount of pressure was put on the financial, accounting standards board to loosen that, and essentially that went away. They didn't have to mark-to-market. So that's the sort of thing that we're going to see. Okay, well, the phrase, it went away. I understand it went away for the bankers, and I understand it went away for the possibility of them facing the guillotine, which, of course, any reasonable person would have that expectation. But what about the global market? They look at this fraud, they look at this charade of American law, and they say, you know what? We don't really have any confidence in your country, your laws, your constitution, and your dollar. So we're dumping your dollar and we're buying precious metals. Now, at creditwritedowns.com, how do you square the circle in terms of the U.S. shooting itself in the head by allowing its kleptocratic, larcenistic, pilfering class to destroy the economy while at the same time destroying the U.S. dollar? What do you advise your subscribers and the people you talk to that they should, how do they protect themselves against this? Well, you definitely have to protect yourself on both sides of the equation, because there's a potential for, high levels of dollar depreciation in case of currency revulsion. So you'd have to look at hard assets, and that includes, precious metals on the one hand, I would say other hard assets like land that's actually valued, that's not overvalued. But then also you have to think about what if the whole thing just deflates into, sort of a depression-like circumstance. That's sort of the worst-case scenario. You need to forestall against that by, buying some sort of hedge against that. You could have bought in the past, I would have said, you could have bought some treasuries, but obviously there are problems with that. And especially with the treasury rate having gotten down to, 2.5%, 3%, that's not really a very good trade. So there aren't really a whole lot of options with regard to the deflation hedge, but you certainly want to reduce your exposure to U.S. assets, look to emerging markets, and real assets.
Ed Harrison, let me read to you a quote from Jim Rogers, and tell me what you think of this. He says, Greece is insolvent, Portugal has a liquidity problem, Spain has a liquidity problem, Belgium has been cooking the books for a long time, Italy has been cooking the books for a long time, and the UK is totally insolvent. Where do you agree, disagree there?
I think he has a lot of that right. Now, let's look at the Eurozone, which is different from the UK. The reality is that Greece, there's no way they're going to make the grade. They're basically insolvent. Eventually, they're going to have to restructure. Ireland, if they continue to prop up their banks, they're basically insolvent as well. I think he's right that Spain could probably get off. Belgium and Italy, they've been cooking the books. But then let's look at the UK. In the Eurozone, you don't have an entity there that will help facilitate the ability to just print money to get out of the situation. Really, at the end of the day, if the UK wanted to get out of the situation, if they came into any problems, it's not about they're being bankrupt. They could just print a bunch of money and pay off their debts. All of their debts are substantially in British pounds. So it's all about inflation and currency depreciation. It's not about insolvency.
Ed Harrison, finally, looking forward to 2011. What's the biggest economic or finance story to look for?
I think two stories. The one story on the upside is emerging markets. How much can emerging markets grow, and how much is that growth going to allow them to decouple at all from the developed economy? And I think the other story to be looking for is in the developed world, how much is the problems that we already see in terms of sovereign debt crisis in Europe and the housing market in the U.S. How much is that going to actually, create problems that could create a double dip, as an example?
All right, Ed Harrison from CreditWriteDowns.com. Thanks again for being on the Keiser Report.
Thanks, Max.
All righty, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Ed Harrison from CreditWriteDowns.com. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.